Right. So now the recording has started. Let me restart the session. Right. We're just 2-3 minutes missed. Right. So anyway, today we will discuss web fundamentals, and before that, this is just a small thing that we had to discuss. That is args and keyword arguments. And here we have discussed that. Uh, Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Just let me admit all the people and then let's start. Okay, so now everyone has joined. So all I was trying to demonstrate here is that here you have these parameters and they cannot be interchanged, right? If you have some specific operation here, right, 2x square or 3y square, so x, y, and z cannot be interchanged, right? So these are called positional arguments, okay? And then obviously arguments only when you are, these are called normal arguments. So let's say I define something here. Let's say I define a function. And then I say that, it takes some arguments. Okay. Just a second, I'm getting it. Sorry. So I am defining this function and it takes a few arguments, let's say x, y, z, right? And it just prints, let's say x plus y plus z, right? So this is a simple function, right? If we run it, then obviously, let me just remove all the print statements. Okay. So if I run this some function and say 3, 4, 5, and just wait this. So 3, 4, 5. Now 3 plus 4 plus 5 will be my answer. So let me just run it. I can. Okay. So it gave me the value of 12, right? The addition. Now, if I were to add one more variable called k, right? I mean, if I just passed one more variable here, right? 8. So what happens if I run it now? It throws an error and it says that some function takes 3 positional arguments, but 4 were given, right? So it is only expecting 3 arguments, but we have given 4, so it threw the error and did not run. So what if we wanted to, make this dynamic that whatever my sum be, it can take any number of values, right? So there we use normal simple arguments, numerical arguments, kewards, keyword arguments. When we put a star in front of arguments, then it becomes dynamic number of numerical arguments, right? And if I do double star in front of the quarks, right, it becomes dynamic number of keyword arguments. And these two arguments, or parameters, can be passed in a function or a method. If you're defining a class, there are methods, so you can pass it there, right? And this or a function, right? So let us see how it works, right? So uh, for example, let's say, let me remove this and let me just comment it. So let me define one more function that can take dynamic number of arguments, right? So I'll say dynamic function, right? And let me just say something like this, args. Okay. Now what happens is that this program will expect uh, some numerical arguments. They can be any number, right? So let's say now I wanted to sum all the arguments which were now passed in the function. What I could implement it like this is that I could just say sum equal to 0 at the beginning, and then I could say for let's say num in uh, star args, right? Args, args. Uh, okay. So this star means that it is dynamic, and then you could say that sum is equal to sum plus number, right? So initially the sum was 0. I'll just, sum is a reserved keyword, that's why you can say that it is saying some glue kind of thing. So let me just call it addition, right? Uh, okay, whatever, addition. So addition is initially 0 and every time it adds the number, whatever numbers are passed through, right? So you could pass multiple number here. And then later at the end you could just print it, right? Print the addition. So this is a simple function where now if you call line function and pass it any number of values 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, any number of values, then it will be able to handle it because now you have defined it that way, right? So this star args, this will ultimately be an iterable, right? We have discussed iterables, and then you can iterate over each of those values, right? Mostly it will be a kind of a list, obviously not exactly a list, but it would be somewhere like a list, and then you can iterate over it, each of the elements, and then assign one value to hold the final addition, and then you can print it. If I run it, then now you can see that I have got 42. If I added just 10 here, so you would get 52. Right. So now my program is able to dynamically uh, take number of inputs. Right. So I think this is fine to everyone. Similarly, there is one more function called keyword arguments. Okay. And so how is that? So obviously this can be args or this can be something else, numbers, let's say. So even then it would work, right? So you could name those anything, right? Similarly, there is one more thing like when double star keyword arguments. So what happens that uh, here you can see that we have some particular these things. Right? Let's say param 2 was ABC, right? And parent 3 was something else, right? So parent 2, I could say, right? Parent, let's say parent 2, this should have verb, and then result could may or may not be an int, that is. So what this will do is multiply this thing this many times, 9 to 3, whatever. So let me just do 2 and 1. 2 and 2. So function name with defined parameters, if I say, and just call it because there are default parameters here. What I will see is that I have to actually print this because it has a return value. So now if I where is the error in line 40? Okay, so just comment this. Now it's say I can see that it just repeats that. So basically what happened was that I defined a keyword and then gave it a value. So this ABC was a keyword argument, right? Now you can keep it like this. Now obviously if I wanted to put one more parent 4 here, right, I will have to specify it like this and then use it here, right, somewhere here. But what if I did not know how many parameters I will pass, uh, you know, from beginning, or how many inputs the user will give, right? Something like this. If he wanted to give so many inputs, then they should be able to give it, right? So how I can define it? Let's say um, I define a simple introduction function, okay? And what it does is that it takes keyword arguments as input, okay, and then now what happens is that when you pass star keyword arguments, this is like a dictionary. Here it is like a list, but here it is like a dictionary. So obviously when you are passing a keyword and a value, right, it is like a dictionary, obviously, right? Key value pairs. So this will be read as a dictionary, and then we have already seen how to traverse over a dictionary, right, or how to loop over it. So we could say anything, right, for key and value in quarks dot items, right? Items. Right, we've already seen how to do this, and then we can just do whatever we want, right? So let's say I had defined a dictionary here, right? My dict, and not here, but inside this. And then what I could do was I could say my dict key equal to value, right? So now your my dictionary will exactly hold those values, and then you can use it, right? And then finally you can print my dict, right? Or return my dict. Let's print it. Now what happens is that you can pass any number of arguments, right? And if I try it here and say introduction, and you know uh, pass it a dictionary. No, not dictionary, because actual keyword arguments. Let's say name equal to Anup, right? And uh, place equal to CHD, and age equal to 27, and whatever. So if I run this, now I can see that uh, follows default. So there is some error because of this. And if we run it again, now I can see that all those arguments that I passed, right? If I pass one more argument called args equal to 1234, right? Even args will be now coming into a dictionary. And once it is there in your program, right, you can use it. You can obviously reference these values and do whatever you want, right? So if we had to take an example, right? Let's take an example from the last session where we had created this small class where we would just take small uh, we would just do a small operation, right? So let me just open a new notebook, or let me just create it here because I will share this file with you, right? So what happens is that now this particular program, right, is we'll take two numbers and then we'll do some operations. Let's say it does these operations, okay? So we'll just copy it and paste it here. Now, what if you wanted to not have just two, but a lot of them, right? So obviously you will have to change your program accordingly, right? So what you can rather do here is that you could say either star args, right, or keyword args, and then you will pass it accordingly, right? So obviously here we want to use numbers, so we will just use simple args, and then right, and then we could apply something like this. So let's say I copy it here, and for add I just paste it here, addition, and in that I do this, right? And add will take uh, so you will just say that self dot numbers equal to mm, numbers numbers. So here it is args, so you will call args, right? and you don't need to have num2, right? So you will have only one of these. Okay, you will call it self.r feature, and then here also you will use r, right? So and then at the end you can just return the addition. Now let me just comment these and test one of it. So I'll just do this 32, 54, 35, 20, etc. Now I'm taking multiple arguments, okay, and then I can use it. So if I'll just click it, actually it should be self.arg because the current instance should be mentioned. So now it gives me the value, right? So obviously I can simply do something like this. So for example, if I had to do multiply, right, I could do something like this. I could say multiplication, right? And again self.arg, so multiplication into number, right? This would make sense. This should be 1, right? Because if you multiply by 0, then uh, it's a waste. So let's just try this. Now you can multiply it, multiply all of those numbers and print it. Multiply. Let's see if there is multiplication. There was an unindexed block. So now it gave me the multiplication, right? So obviously I can now change any number of arguments and it would give me those values, right? So this is how you can take multiple arguments, right? And similarly multiple keyword arguments. Okay? So I hope this is clear to everyone now. How we can take dynamic number of our keyword arguments or dynamic number of arguments. Accordingly, we will have to handle that, right? If we know it is a list, we will have to iterate and assign that to something. If it is a dictionary, then obviously again we will have to define something, right, to hold it. Okay. So here my dict thing had held it, right? So anyway, I hope this is clear to everyone. If there is any issues, please let me know, or otherwise we can proceed to the web fundamentals thing. With this, the uh, Python is complete, right? So any issues? No. So let's proceed with our let's put our focus on back on the web scraping part. And so this let's discuss about web today. So let's discuss the common terms that are used in web. Okay, and so those terms are like client. Okay, many times we used client side or server side in conversations related to web application, right? So the client side is basically a browser, right? A browser or a user agent, a program, a web scraper, a web automation tool, whatever. User agent can be your own program as well. Okay. So any program that is accessing the application, that is called client, right? And so application is accessed by client, and application is hosted somewhere, right? It is placed somewhere, uh, and that particular place is called server, uh, right? Obviously, not exactly. So, I mean, server is used very loosely, right? When we say server side, it means that wherever the application is hosted, something is happening there, right? So it could be on-premise or it could be hosted over cloud. So let's say there is your own web application and it is hosted on a virtual machine or AWS, right? Okay, so that is called a server. Obviously, in more crude terms, the application server would be the server, right? So the server is again loosely, used. So the application, the program which will be serving our web application is called the exact server, right? So anyway, we will understand how this is, why this is used like that. Anyway, so there is client side, that is browser, and server side, the where the application is hosted. Okay. So and then there are some, just let's discuss what are these, so that uh, it will just give you a brief technological overview of what is used on the web. So most common languages are HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So anything you want to create on web, right? Any web page, I don't know, let's open some, right? This one. So this one is, all of this is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? All of it. So anything you want to create, you will have to code it in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. These are, uh, kind of programming languages. JavaScript is a programming language. These two, this is a styling markup, and this is um, standard hypertext markup. Okay, so right, we will discuss about these, and then there is more common languages. So what is front end? Front end is basically what you can see. It's again very used very loosely. So this is your front end, and whatever logic that you cannot see, which is working at the back end, backside to make all of this possible, that is called backend, right? So front end is what you can see, back end is what the logic that you cannot see. Okay? So very loosely we can use this. Obviously, this is used very loosely in particular aspects. Anyway, so backend is, when we are saying backend, we are talking about the website backend. They are generally programmed using PHP, Python, Ruby. So obviously the order is based on what is currently there on web, right? So most of the websites are using PHP because of WordPress, right? And then there are other Django and other, right? So most similarly, so there are something called frameworks, right? So frameworks are just built on these programming languages. So jQuery is built on JavaScript, React.js, and AngularJS. Right? They are all built on JavaScript, but uh, just okay. So they are built on JavaScript, but they provide you a structured way to code, right? So when we say JavaScript, hello, any doubts? Sorry, Jennifer, I just muted you for a minute. So anyway, so we were discussing that jQuery, React.js, and AngularJS. These are common front-end frameworks. Frameworks basically um, give you a structured way to program anything. Okay, you can simply understand like that. And then there are backend frameworks like Express.js. Express is a Node.js framework. If you heard of Node.js, that is again JavaScript. Django is Python. Spring Boot, if you heard, that is coded in Java, right? And then there is Laravel that uses PHP. So we don't need to know all of these programming languages. Just need to know basics of HTML, CSS, JavaScript to do web scraping of any kind of website. Okay, so I hope this is clear now. Then let's proceed to each of these things. We will not go into detail in web frameworks or anything like that, or even backend languages, because each of those languages, as you can see, Python took so much time, and every language has its own basics, right? So we will not get into it. JavaScript obviously is again a very similar programming language as Python, in aspect that it is also an object-oriented programming language, right? The syntax obviously is very different, but so these two, Python as well as JavaScript, these two only we need to know to do any kind of web scraping, right? So let's proceed on this. First, we will discuss what HTML is, right? So HTML is the standard markup language for web pages. Right. So what is a markup language? Markup language, you can say that it just defines structure, or um, just you are basically creating a like a mesh. Okay, so you are just defining what all things will be there, right? So for example, it's like you are creating a list of objects in your documents, right? And those are not elaborated, but that define the structure of your document, right? So you can understand it something like that. So it is used to create any kind of website structure, obviously. So let's inspect what that means. If I say that new page source, right, I can see that this is not a great example. Let's take some other website. This one. So we will discuss this kind of website also. This uses a framework called React, as we have mentioned here, right? So here, if you go to its page source, you will not find any of this data, right? We will also, so we've already seen these sort of websites in the introductory session when we saw that, how to scrape such a website which has no data in source. Okay? Anyway, so we will just see for now which data is in source, and when we see the page source, right? Then let's wait for it to appear. We can see that it starts with something called doc-type HTML, right? And then there is HTML, there are other tags, right? All of these things, and then it ends with something called this thing, HTML. So HTML is at the root of everything, right? Everything is included in this HTML thing, right? So that is what, right? HTML is the root of any document available on the web, right? If I had to even see the source of this, even this would say that it starts with HTML and then it ends on HTML, right? So HTML is the root of any document that is available on the web page, right? So uh, that is why it is very important, right? And we need to understand how it works. So there are obviously HTML elements that we need to understand, and any HTML element is simply it's simply presented like this. Okay, so you have a tag. This tag name could be anything that we will discuss. It could be from all of these things, and then there is this style, uh, this class ID, and then there is this content, and then there is this tag name. Okay, so this is how any element, or a tag is defined in HTML. Right. So let's do some hands-on HTML for 1 minute to understand how it works. I will just go to snippets and say HTML. Uh, Snippets is not available, I guess. Install package. Just give me 1 minute. Right. So I'll just uh, importing the structure of HTML document so that I can explain what are all the aspects. It's not loading. I don't need that. Anyway, I'll just create it myself. Okay. So there is something called HTML, and then there is something called head, and then let me just uh, call it HTML. Okay, head, right? And then there is something called body. Okay, and then there is something called again HTML. So here we can see that you know here we have something HTML and then head and then whatever. Try one second. Repetition. Now it is. So I'll just go to snippets and for HTML. Now this is a HTML snippet. Here you can see that it started with a doc type HTML. So any website, if you see its web source, it will start from doc type HTML. So what it says that this document is HTML, and then there is this first tag called HTML, right? And it is closed, right? So basically it starts from here. Okay, HTML start and HTML close. Inside this HTML, there are two main tags. One is head, right? This head has some information which is relevant to this the browser. Okay, and then there is this body tag. Again, it is relevant to the browser, but it is shown on the screen. So whatever is shown on the screen is available inside these body tags, right? So it just if I had to inspect it, I can see that there is something called body here, right? Where is it? Uh, can't find. Okay, here it is. Right? This is the body. So here is the body, and from after head, so there is this head, okay, and after the head closes, there is this body tag which is starting, and then the body tags also close, right in the end. Can't find it. Okay. Anyway, so any document is like this, and inside this body, you have more elements. Like H1. This is heading. You may or may not follow this. This is just for understanding, right? And then we have a paragraph, right? This is a paragraph, and then let's try a list, okay? An ordered list, and in this I say list item 1, okay, and then I say list item 2, and let me just try and save this and see how it works. So I'll just say sample.html, okay, and let me just add two more things. Title is my sample web page, and then let me just give it a style of style equal to call it color as red, okay, and font size as some 32. Uh, let's not or not give it at all. Okay, so anyway, so this is some basic HTML that I have written. If I say that it has sample.html and then run it, right? How can I run it? I can go to the this thing and then just simply run it. Okay, so this is what I have got, right? And if I see the page source, this is what I had written. Okay, so ultimately what happens is that the browser only understands this text, right? Which is given to it, and then it knows how to comprehend it and convert it into this form, right? So I had created a list, and then I had created a paragraph, I had created a heading. There are some small these things here, right? It is because of these things. But anyway, so this is how any web page is created, right? So this is here is only structure, right? I'm just giving a structure here. So this is how HTML works, right? So in any web page, you will see the structure like this. Obviously, in the head, you will have something like link, and then it would link to style sheet, right? Other things, right? So, but we will discuss it later. For now, let us only understand this much. Right, so here we have understood how HTML HTML structure looks like, and then now let's discuss the next thing, where it's about these things. Whenever we want to specify some content, right? So it is between the starting and ending tag, right? Here we have seen that there is some tag, right? Whenever a tag starts, it is to be closed, and here is this tag, it is then closed, and whatever content is shown on the screen is inside this, right? Anyway, even the my sample web page title, if you can see, it says my sample web page, right? The title is shown. It is because I had specified it. Okay. So this is, and here I did specify the color, right? Style. So it is red. Okay. So this is how it works. You can see the content is here. So anyway, what its takeaway is that what you have to do when you are doing web scraping in any site, you have to find these tags, exactly locate these elements which are there, and then somehow extract it between these from these tags. Okay, this is all we have to do every time we do web scraping. Obviously, to in fact to get this much itself might be a lot of effort. So we will see that. So anyway, so now we have a few. Let's explore a few these elements called heading, paragraphs, div, images, links, and tables. We've already explored heading, paragraphs, and a list, right? List I have not mentioned here, but we've already seen. Similarly, if I had to put an image, right, I could just specify a source and let me not define it for now, but I'll just show you. And then there could be a form, right? And then form could have something, right? An input, an input button, right? Or input normal checkbox, value equal to something, this, okay. And then it's simple. So anyway, um, number let's folder 1 2 3. So now if I check this, I can see that those elements have also come, right? Not, I mean, there must be some error here. Obviously, there are some errors. So, but anyway, we can see that all of these things are, shown here, right? So whenever I am starting a tag, right, there is some tags, and inside there are some things which are here, right? There is action, there is method, there is accept cache set here, there is placeholder, value, etc. These are called attributes, right? Attributes of the tag, right? This tag has some attributes, and these are the attributes. This H1 tag, right? This particular thing is called an element, right? This particular thing is called a tag, and whatever is inside here is called the content, and whatever is inside the tag itself, right? Between this starting arrow and this ending arrow, whatever is inside, those are called attributes, right? And uh, then obviously there is something called divisions, right? Division is like a block. There are something called links. So here these are called links. If I inspect it, I can see that I have a link here. I could define my own link and say uh, something like this: a uh, href right? Okay. Anyway, so it says I'll just say that google.com, and now I can see that I could create my own link, right? Go to Google, and it goes to Google. Okay? So this is how links are specified, and other things, tables, forms, all of those things can be specified. If I had to just see a table, because tables also we will see a lot. So because tables, we generally get data from tables, right? So we can see that something like this is there, and if I would just see how this table looks like. Some issue again because of this. So T T head, T body. Okay. So space it a few times so that it is, you know, it shows what we are trying to understand. So now I can see that I have four headers and four uh, columns, right? Four columns and in one row. If I wanted to add one more row, what I could do is in the body, I could just add this row, right? And then I will have one more row of data. Okay. So this is exactly how even this table, which is placed here, would be formed, right? If I just inspect it and see, even this one is a table here, table with a T head, right, and a T body. Okay. So this is how a table looks like with a T head and a T body, right? So whenever you would want to scrape data from a table, right, you could search the table and then search the T head and then search the T body and then search TRs. You get the point, right? You could search it and then you could extract from it. So this is how a table looks like, and then we have forms we've already seen, images and divs, all of these things we've seen, right? Div is just again a simple division. If you wanted to say, uh, it basically holds is basically created to define an area, right? So if I just define um, a style to it and call width of 200 pixels and height of 200 pixels and background of let's say red, right? So what it would do, and let me just write something here. This is some text, okay? So now if I see, what happens is that I have this block, this area, right, which on which I have defined some area, right, and some attributes, and it contains a paragraph with some text, right. So ultimately, this is how everything works under the hood for HTML, right. So we have seen most the obviously there can be other tags from which you want to extract data, but these are most of the prominent tags from which you would want to extract data or do something with forms or other stuff, right? So and now we've already seen these tags also, right? There is something called a head tag, there is something called a body tag, and there are other tags called style and script. Let's check them out. They can be defined anywhere, but we generally define them in head, right? So we call script, right? And then we could write our own JavaScript, right? So if I defined a button here, there is a button, and I called on click, right, and said uh, some function, and define that function here. Okay. Hmm, Actually, I've forgotten how to define a function in Java. So, uh, right, it just takes two parameters and returns it. So very similar to Python function, right? So if I define it something like this and copy it and paste it here, and then you know uh, do something or console log or alert, you know, button click. So and it doesn't take any argument, and my function it is. So I'll just say my function. Now if I click the button, right, this one, I just check once. My function is not defined. So it's not my function maybe. Right? So if I click this, this does not work. Uh, Anyway, let me just do something like this to show, just to show what I want to show you, so that only the example is to be focused on. Then I can remove. If I just do something like this. So I said button click, right? So this particular line of code is JavaScript, right? So all I wanted to show you that basically you could uh, uh, I mean, if you wanted to click a button, right, and that button on loop did something else, right, so you would have to know how to access that button, right, and for that you would need to know these forms. Obviously, when we will come to JavaScript, we will see why this worked or did not work. Okay, but this is called inline JavaScript, right? You could do something like this, a button click again, so if you just run it again, that function will run again. Okay. Just click it and the button click again. Here you can see the source has all of that stuff that we have written. So this source is then converted to that. Obviously, there is one error because of this thing. Now we got it. This was throwing error, and that's why there were some issues. So we can just anyway. So let's proceed with the next topic. Uh, So we've already seen what are attributes, anything inside of the tag, which is used to define that tag better, are called attributes. There is something called class and there is something called ID. So classes and ID are generally used to identify as an identifier. IDs are generally used as an identifier because IDs are same throughout. I mean, basically IDs are unique, and classes can be unique or cannot be unique, right? So we will see what is the significance. But if I had to simply tell you, right, let me come to that and then we will discuss. Apart from that, there is something called layout elements, right? These are predefined elements in HTML. So HTML5 to be exact, because HTML5 is the latest standard in web. There is something called header. So if you consider your web page like this, right? Header is at the top, nav is the navigation bar which is in the middle. Then there is section article. So if you define a tag called section, it would by default be here. If you wanted to see a side, right? A side would be like a sidebar. Okay. Then there is article, right? If you wanted to have something here, you could write it in article tag. So without even styling anything, your default positions for all of these elements, if you use these layout element tags, will be like this, right? So you will find websites which will be using the latest layout, and you will find that they are structured in this form. And ultimately, then later we have form elements, right? So we will be interacting with a lot of forms. So there is something called input, label, selection, option, text area button. Let's actually look at one of the forms somewhere. Right? Let's check what is this one. Inspect. Right? I can see that it is an input. Okay. So then there is something called a button. Right? There is a button here which can be clicked. All of these are again like links. Okay, you can see that these are links, right? So even the new tab page itself is a HTML page, right? You could see the page source and see that how Google or anyone who has written this particular theme had written the code. So this one looks better. You can see that how this whole page is structured, right? This is the code which is understood by this page and then rendered in this form. Right? I may not be able to even find all of this. But again, right, if we wanted to check more, so These are like wherever you can find these kind of links, you can click them and see that even these are the files which were used in designing this, right? So obviously you can see that there is some user interaction on the page, right? Or there is some hover. All of these styles, or there is something called like this. When you click this, something happens. So all of this user interaction is because of JavaScript. And you can see that we have a lot of JavaScript files here, right? We have a lot of CSS files, which is styling files, and then we have this whole HTML thing, right? So these three things are needed, right? So this is how this page is formed, and then there is more CSS or JavaScript. Mm, let's proceed. So anyway, there are input labels. Right, label is just the label inside right side of that. When you do a selector, basically drop down menu. Option are the options in the drop down menu. Text area is a big area input, right? So when you have multi-line, area input, multi-line input, that is called text area, and then there is button. So these are form elements, right? Button you may have to click sometimes to get some data, right? Data driven pages they are called. So there are pages which will only give data when button is clicked. Those are called data driven pages. I think this is enough to understand what we want to how we want to scrape something, right? Only HTML is not required. HTML is required only to understand the the page source, right? What is written here, or how the application is structured, how the web page is structured, right? Because the first step, wherever we would want to scrape data, we had already mentioned that first we will have to inspect it and check that the data that we want to create or get where it is exactly placed, and for that you will have to inspect the HTML of the web page. Okay, and you will be able to inspect that only if you know HTML or you have some idea of how HTML works. So I think having this much idea should be enough, and to know how all of this works, it should be enough for you to proceed. So if there is any issue with HTML, right? Obviously you don't want to code HTML yourself, and in this course you only want to understand how to scrape it. So I think this should be enough. If there is any doubt, please let me know, or we can proceed further. So I'll just take 1 minute pause. In fact, let me show you one select kind of thing, because sometimes you have to select options and then only you will have to press enter, right? So let me just remove this. Let me name. I don't need to give, but I can give a label, right? I can say what is it doing now? Choose a car. Choose anything. So you can say choose anything. Cars. Okay. Car. You could say train or airline, whatever. Right? So so now we can see that this particular thing was rendered like this. Okay. So we have this thing where now I can choose. Obviously, this is not how it could be seen on sites, because those are styled, but by default it is like this. And then obviously you can click submit whatever you want. So just wanted to show you that there is something called select, and then there are options, right? And sometimes you will have to choose all those options and put it in the form and then click the button. Okay. So I think that should be it with HTML. And let's proceed with CSS now. Okay. CSS is called cascading style sheets. So if you want to style something on the web page, CSS is the way to go. Okay. So here we have already seen that this is how the whole structure of a web page looks like. There is something called CSS and there are something called JS, and this whole thing is called HTML. You need just three of these to design a web page. Okay. And design a web page, and then obviously CSS takes care of the actual design as per say, what element is placed here, there, where, what is its border, what is its color, what is its font size. All of those things are controlled by cascading style sheets. And then there is something called JS, right? JavaScript, right? .css, .js, these are files which contains JavaScript code, this contains CSS code or markup, right? So JS is responsible for actions or user interaction or other things. CSS specifically is for design, right? Placement of elements, looks, fields, cosmetics. Okay, it is all handled by CSS. So that is why we need to understand CSS, because let's say I would ask you to scrape links which are only appearing in brown in color, okay, or red in color, right? So you will have to first find that which links are red in color, and to find that you will have to um, know, I mean, those attributes or how to find it. And before that, you will need to know what those actually are, right? So just a brief. So it describes how HTML element should be displayed. There is something called CSS element selector, right? So let's say I wanted to style this A, right? So I could have said here that let me just remove this, and let me just create an element called style, right? So this is how you can create a style element, and in this style you could reference them, right? So let's say you wanted to style an element. So this particular thing, when you use a style tag to do some styling, this is called you are basically defining the style inside the page, so it is called in-page styling. Here I have styled it in line, right? So this is called inline styling. And then obviously here you can see that it uses some external CSS, right? It uses somewhere else. So this is called external, linking or external styling, external style sheets. So anyway, अभी हम in-page styling देख रहे हैं. And this is why we are doing it like this, because it is easy to demonstrate how CSS works. So I'll just show you here. We have seen that there is something called element selector. So what if you wanted to style this A link, right? Such that its color was red, let's say. So what you could do was simply say A, right? A is the tag, and then you could start a curly brace and say color equal to, let's say, yellow. Okay? So yellow. So all of these red, yellow are basic recognized here. Otherwise, I would have to use something like this. Some hexadecimal numbers, but let's not worry. Let's use some similar simple things. And now, if I see my sample page, right now, I would be able to see that my this thing here link is yellow. Let's use some different color. Let's use dark yellow. I don't know if it works. Uh, Dark green maybe. Again, I don't know if it works, but let's see. It doesn't work. So I will have to do something like this, dark green. So anyway, this now is dark green. Okay, so you can change color, right? And you could just use the tag name, right? So let's say I wanted this thing to happen on P, so I'll just use P, right? And now this paragraph should be dark green, right? So this paragraph is now dark green. I hope you can see it. I'll just uh, zoom in, and you can see that this is dark green, right? So what if I wanted to do it on both? I could just do yeah. So that would happen on both, right? This as well as this, as well as this. Okay. So all of the P as well as A tags became dark green. Okay. So this is called element selection. And with element selection, you can select like this and then specify. So if I wanted to say font size should be 100 pixels, right? Very big. So I could certainly do that, and then all of that would be 100 pixels, right? Very big. If I just zoom in back, so you can see. So anyway, this is how you could do that. Obviously, you would not be doing it yourself, but to understand how everything works, this is just one reference. And then again, there is something called ID selector, and then there is something called class selector, and then there is something called universal selector, right? So ultimately, all of it is defined like this: your selector, then your attribute, and then your value. Okay. So there is this selector, right? Sorry, this is the selector, this is your attribute, and this is your value of the attribute, right? If I wanted to give it a border and say 1 pixel, I don't know, dashed black, if it works like this, let's say, or 2 pixels, okay. Black dashed or dashed black, again, I don't remember, so let's try. It works. So anyway, all of that has some black border which is dashed. Okay. So all of the this is how it works. So if I asked you to get me data from only those files, right? Let's say you identified a website where the data that you want is placed only in such kind of order, right? So this is only if you want to get this is paragraph, go to Google and this is some text. So it is inside some border, right? So you will have to first find using whatever information that you have, right? This, and you will arrive at these P and A tags and then get the data out of it. Okay, so that is it. Now, class selector and ID selector. Let's discuss what are these. So let's say I had defined a class here, and I would call that class that big text. Okay, big text, right? Something like this. So, and I would let's say call uh, uh, another paragraph here called big text. Okay? And then let's say I would do something like this. And if it is a class, I will do dot and that class name. So I have said big text, right? Big text. Now what happens is that wherever I have used that class, now my selector is this, right? And my attributes are that. So I have used it only at the A link, right? This class and this class. So let's see what happens. What happens was that, this here the class was removed and only these two had it, right? So I mean, I hope this makes sense now. Now I have used a class. If I all I had to do if I wanted to apply this style anywhere else was uh, just put that here. Right? So if I wanted to give it this style here, right? Let's say here. Okay, I'll just put a class of vectors, and then what would happen is that that particular thing will also copy that style, right? So this is called um, class selector, and then similarly there's something called ID selector. So if I would give this a ID of some para, let's say para, and then so my class is selected by dot, right? My ID would be selected by a hash. Okay, so my ID would be dot hash para, right? And now this particular text will only have this style, right? Because I've removed from the rest of it. So I can see that only this is the paragraph has the style and the rest does not have. Right. The only difference between a class and the ID is that IDs are unique. So you cannot put ID in something else. Let's say here, right? You cannot put an ID. Maybe you could Obviously, HTML allows all of that, but the thing is that you would not be able to find it, right? So IDs you should only use because for this particular thing, for this particular behavior, you already have class, right? If you wanted to copy style to everything, right, you could obviously do with using a class. But why ID is also there is because if you wanted to only do something to one thing, right, not to different things. So if you could do parrot too, right, and then it would not be applied there. It would only be applied to para, right? So if you wanted to do some unique styling, right, you could use ID. So I hope now ID and classes are also clear. Universal selector, right? You could just do something like this, and then all of it will follow the same style. So if I just now you can see that all the elements follow the same style. Right? So it is called a universal selector. Obviously, matlab, just need to understand all of this, and I hope this will clarify whatever CSS looks like. So if I just go to this source and now exactly see what a CSS file looks like, I'll just see that, as I saw. So there is some class called overlay dialog, which has these attributes, right? And then there is, I don't know, let's check out some ID, right? So if I do hash, right, I could see that there is some ID called text container right here. And then it has some value. Okay, so IDs, classes, right? Uh, these are selectors, right? These are attributes, these are values, right? And these are class selectors, these are ID selectors, right? So you get the idea, right? You selectors are basically how you select it, either by element or by ID or by class, right? And then you could do anything you want. You could style it as you want. Okay, so this is how styling works on web pages. Right? I hope this is clear to everyone. Uh, I hope no doubts. So let's proceed. The third thing that we need to understand is called JavaScript, and JavaScript is also a object-oriented programming language. Right? Everything is an object in JavaScript, just like we have seen in Python. Even a small primitive data type has its own class, right? So when we call something an object, basically what it means is that it is defined using classes, right? And now our concepts are clear on classes and objects and methods and attributes. So we are pretty clear that how an object-oriented programming language works. Right? JavaScript is a very similar programming language, but what it does is that it's primarily used for web page behavior or user interaction. Right? It programs either user interaction or web page behavior. Basically, if you click, what is to be done, right? Or uh, when web page is scrolling down, right? If you have to get more data, so there are infinite scroll pages, right? You keep scrolling, and more data comes, right? Those kind of pages are also there. So that is also programmed using JavaScript. So anything that happens on the web, right? You can just say JavaScript. Anything that is happening on web is because of JavaScript. Only one language is available. If there are other languages, right, they are ultimately translated back to JavaScript because our browser only understands JavaScript in some form. Okay, obviously it has support for some of the other libraries, but some of the things that are again JavaScript is also a standard, right? JavaScript is a vast language, and you would also hear things called TypeScript, right? And so basically vanilla JavaScript, right? Vanilla JS. They are called. They are all similar things. It's a standard, right? JavaScript is a standard, uh, and again, let's not get much into it because I mean it is actually developed by a foundation which would give you a set of rules, and then you can create your own JavaScript, right? So JavaScript is not created by someone; it's basically a standard, right? And then obviously it is used on web, right? There is a there is an organization to manage it. So uh, I think that should be enough for us to know. And then um, we've already discussed this. So let's discuss what is DOM, right? Document Object Model. DOM is, I mean, basically it's a simple programming interface that allows you to uh, to access whatever elements are available in a web page, right? So if if I had to understand it, right? So you let's consider this page or my own page, right? This. So here I can see that there is HTML at the top level. There is body, right? Body is inside HTML, but it is at the same level as head, right? Body. And then we have script, we have h1 and script h1 are at the same level, p are at the same level, ul, li is inside ul, right? And then there is input which is inside form, but all of these are at the same level. Obviously, inside table there is t head and then there is tr and then there is these things. So what happens is basically when a web page is loaded, right? The browser, the application creates a document object model of this web page. So this is some data, right? Okay. Let if I wanted to visualize this in tree form. So what would happen was that obviously this looks like a tree because it is already indented, right? So in a tree form, there is I don't know how to do that, but HTML. Right? Let's say in the middle there was HTML, right? And in HTML had two things called head, right? And head, and then body, right? And then inside head we had title and style, right? So there was title and style, right? Inside body you had a lot of things, right? You had h1p, ul, image. So if I wanted to say it like this, then H1P UL, right, and form, and then again below a form, right, we had input, right, input button, right, etc. So there is this hierarchy, there is this tree, right? I hope you can visualize it. So this tree is created by the browser. And now when this tree is created by the browser, right? It now knows where exactly each of those elements are placed. So if I wanted to access this element, it knew that I have to traverse to body, then I have to go to form, and then I have to go to input, right? So if something like this happens, it makes our job easy to access any element, right? So basically what DOM is that it's a document object model and it's a programming interface which creates a tree of objects in the document, right? It defines each of the HTML elements which are there as objects, and then whatever properties they have, whatever attributes they have. It also defines that methods, what all can be done with those HTML elements and events, right? If it is to be on clicked or on hovered, right? Events like this, and what it does is that when it creates this tree of objects, then it allows for manipulation of those elements using JavaScript. Now you could use JavaScript to manipulate those elements, and do things like um, you could get or change or add or delete elements, or delete styles or add styles to any element. So you could basically manipulate the whole document, right? So now let's see if I have created my own document. Let me just close some of these tags, right? um, okay. So, and before that I will just take it back to, let's say, p and a, only these. So, right, this one also is, so I'll say, let's say only para, so only one element will have this, right? Now let's say I have this web page and I wanted to manipulate this web page, right? So I will just show you an introduction, and what I will do is that I will use this console, right? This is called developer console. We will discuss it in next lecture. But there is something, a tab called console, and here I can write my own JavaScript, something called document.getElementById, right? And if there was some ID called para, right, I have defined one, I would get that, right? Okay, so I can obviously write some JavaScript here, but let me show you how to do that. So, but before that, let's discuss few things, right? So, right, some methods. Okay, so let me write it in some file which I can share with you. Okay, so let me find this as JavaScript file first. And then let me save it as DOM functions and API. So anyway, I will not run this, but I will share this with you. So let's discover the DOM programming interface. And why you need to know this is because obviously again you will be automating a lot of JavaScript using a tool like Selenium to get the data that you desire. Okay, so let's see. First of all, right, all elements are all uh, elements HTML elements are converted as objects. Okay, so now everything is an object, right? They have their own attribute methods and something. Okay, so we will discuss what they are. So for example, uh, if I wanted to change, so let's say I define a script here, right? Where is the page? I define a script here, script, and this is stupid, and let me remove this also. So I'm defining a simple script which does something. Let me show you what happens here. I say document, right? Document dot get element by ID, element by ID, right? And I say para, right? And I say equal to uh, blah blah, right? Blah blah. Now I can see that I have done something here. What I have said that something called document, and then asked it to get element by ID. So in this document, I've asked it to get element by ID, and what ID called para, right? We have something called para, and then I'm saying that it's inner HTML. HTML should be blah blah. So basically, this is called inner HTML or content, right? So I'm asking this program, this small line of JavaScript, to change the text from this is a paragraph to blah blah. So if I run it now, right, I will say that inner HTML of null. Okay. So it is because obviously because of the last thing what happened. So I'll just define the script here. Uh, what just happened? We'll just copy it and paste it here. So now if I see that text has changed to blah blah. So what has happened now that you know mm, this this paragraph this is a paragraph which was initially formed, but as the file got executed later, we saw that it says that whatever was there inside this to change it to blah blah. So for a split second, obviously there would have been that here, but later it changed. So let's say let me just create a function and call it click. Okay, and then whenever that function is ran, I will do this. Otherwise, I will not do it. So let's say, and then I assign it here and say, click, right? Now what happens is that if I just, this is a paragraph, when I would click this button, this becomes blah blah. So what I've said that whenever I would, click this on click, a function will run, right? The function is this, and the function will do something like this. Okay, so basically what I was able to do was, change the text of the page, right? So this is how JavaScript is powerful, right? And you could use JavaScript to manipulate all kind of forms, right? So we will see how to do that. Right? Let's try some of that stuff. And let's start. So we have seen that how we can do something like uh, document.id. So I'll just write it here. Get elements by ID. So whenever you want to get element by ID, what happens is that this page, this page which contains all the data, this all of this thing is called document, right? So if you want to access this page, what you could say was document, and the document you could see contained exactly all of that stuff, right? All of this stuff is again repeated here. Okay, so the document is basically whatever the source is. This is. I don't know where the source is, but the source is called document. And then you can do document dot get element by ID, right? You could obviously, if the whole document is source, you could find something called an ID there, right? And say something, right? Obviously, para is not available here. Para was available in my own one, right? So if I do the same thing here and call para, right? Document dot get element by ID and call it para. Right? Here it would be recognized because here I have defined that. Okay, so anyway, this way what I can do is that in my document, I can search for anything that I want, right? So let's say I wanted to search, this is my HTML page, wanted to search something by ID. I know what ID is already available. So this is all the part where we do inspection, right? And then pass it here. I would get this. I would in fact be able to, assign it to someone, something, right? Let para, and then para dot text or inner HTML, right? Text content I could get para dot inner uh, inner H, inner HTML you could assign, right? You could say new text, right? And then you would have new text. Okay. So this was only possible because the web page, so the browser converted whatever the source of this web page was into a tree kind of structure that which is called DOM, right? And then from DOM, I could able to get element by ID and other stuff, do other stuff. Okay. This is exactly like how we were assigning values to our dictionary, right? So you could consider all of them as kind of dictionaries, right? Anyway, not hard and fast to do. So get element by ID. Why I'm saying not hard and fast is because it is just to understand. If we get into JavaScript crudely, then the meanings of this may change. So just to understand, you can understand it like this. The second thing is inner HTML property that we've already seen, right? And then you know there are other things like this. So let's say you wanted to get element by tag name, right? So here you can see that when I press get, you could see that we have get element dot id, get element by class name, get element by name, get element by tag name, and get element by tag name space. Get selection, get select query command, right? So there are a lot of things right here. So we could do all of that. So this document has a lot of functions which can be done, but we will explore only a few of them which are relevant to us. So we will say document dot get element by ID, right? And here we would pass ID. Okay, this would give me what? The element. If we had to get element by class name. Right? So again, why are we doing this? Is this because let's say something like this, inspect, and I saw that all of these had some class, right? So I would want to get, see all of them has some class, right? So I would want to get all of the elements which has this particular class, right? And to do that, I just need to understand once that how to get this. So if I did something like document dot get element by class name, right? Get elements by class name, and then just pass this class here. Okay, this one. I would see that this was able to select all of those elements, right? All of them. So if I just do something like this, right? It would just show me that what this exact element was. And now it comes to it comes in kind of a list, right? You can see that it is a list. So you could iterate over it and do something that you want. Okay. So get element by class name is useful to us. So we can say that document dot get elements by class name. You would actually be using this to scrape some complex websites, as you will see in later lectures. And then we have get elements by tag, right? And then we have get elements by name. Okay, so we have only these four which are useful for us. So let's quickly see how they work. So get element by tag, right? So as we know, we have a lot of tags, right? TD. So let's say I know all my things are in TD. I could just say that document dot get element by tag name and just would have said TD, right? So all my TD would have come right here, and then there are 10,491 elements. Seems like a list. I could iterate over it and do whatever I want, right? Again, so tag name is fine. Then there is called by name, get element by name, right? So only if there is some name defined, then you can get it. So let's check if something is defined by name, right? I'm not sure if something would be defined by name, but mostly there are forms which are defined by name. Here, let's check. No name here. Can't find any name, right? So anyway, but if I wanted to do that, I could totally do it. Right? Name if there was some name, but in my own thing, it should work. Here we have defined some name, right? Yes, somewhere we had defined in form we have defined name, not exactly. So let's define a name and let's try to retrieve that. Name is equal to uh, first first input, right? So I could have said first input and then said document dot get element by name, uh, get element by name, okay? And then first input. So now it would give me a node list by name. Maybe I will have to reload the page because it is reload at the backend. So I'll just I can see that I have one input, right? And that input is this one. So I can also get elements by name. Okay. So these are all the ways if you wanted to get those elements and use it, then you could do something like that. So I could say uh, elements by name. So document dot get elements by name and then tag name. Sorry, element name. Okay, and then for getting the tag, right? Elements by tag. Again, I don't know how, right? So let's check document dot get elements by tag name. So we can say that only ID does not have a S. Okay, rest all of them has S because only ID is the one which will be giving you an unique value. Okay, generally, obviously we saw that we can assign the same ID to multiple tags, but that is how it is assumed to be. So even all of them has elements. So by default, all of them should be more than one. Okay, should be or can be one. So we will just say that by tag name, just something like this, and then tag. So I think you just need to understand these ones to get data, and this is all the DOM that you need to understand. We will not go into depth of JavaScript. Now, if you can do something like this, right? You could do more, obviously. So let's say here I have this thing, right? So what I could do is that if I know how to, do some coding in Java or JavaScript, I could say that if I, I don't know, just copy this and say that dot length, and then I plus plus, right? So just let me remove this here, I plus plus, and then print td dot inner sorry, I dot inner html, not v, I dot inner html. So it might do something again. I don't know if it do something, but again, basically it did something, and then so there might be some link which got clicked, which says that export this. So this particular thing opened, right? So basically something happened. I think lot of things got clicked. So I'll just remove it. So this just just wait a second, guys. Okay. So all of these links had some links. Okay, that getting clicked again and again. So I'll just close this page. Okay, not needed. So you get the idea that you can do then operations on the final thing that you're getting, right? So again, it's a kind of programming, and in all of that, uh, you know, you could do some operation. Okay. So I think this is all for today's session in terms of how these elements are can be defined and understood. Okay, so I hope you all would have understood how to get, change, add, or delete elements, right? I changed some of those things, right? I changed inner um, you know inner html. Let's say I wanted to let's do some more examples. Let's say I wanted to change the color of this, right? I could again do it using javascript. So this has an ID of para2. So let's say I do something like this: document dot get element by ID, right? And it has para2. Okay, so now I know para2. Obviously this thing can be can have an attribute, right? So let me just assign it to something. Let me call it war heading, right? This was the heading. So I'll just say something like this, and then the heading, right? Heading is h1.para2, right? As I said heading, it just highlighted it here. Okay, so heading dot again style, right? So it has a style, and the style it has a color. Okay, so I'll just say dot uh, color. Okay, and then could assign it to blue, right? Something like that. So now this is changed to blue. Okay, so this is how you could manipulate it also, right? So I hope this much you everyone could understood that again, why would you need to manipulate HTML? We saw it, right? When we were doing the site called Make My Trip, there we saw that you know we would have to click some elements, change basically some of the elements, right? Or put something in form or other things, right? To get the final data. So that is why we need to do something like this. I think already in first lecture I had shown you so that what is the difference between DOM and page source. So here is the page source, right? Page source does not have data, but DOM will always have data. Okay, so here we can see that this thing will have data. Let's come to this. Let's see. So here we can say that we have data, right? So this particular thing, which is there in this, in this tab called elements, this is called DOM, right? The page source was this, but the browser was able to convert this page source into a tree structure, right? And this tree structure, we were able to traverse and get any data, right? That exactly is what we want to do in web scraping. Okay. So I think this is all for today. In the next session, I wanted to do this also, some live coding session on this site, which uses some basic things, right? I think we will start with this in the next session because this will take some considerable time, and I would want all of you to follow it along. Uh, Okay, and then we will get to the networking concepts. Not exactly lot of networking, but only the HTTP requests and some other protocols, right? And then we would understand it. That is only needed to understand, how the data is flowing between server and client, right? And once you understand how the data is flowing, that is also one of the steps for you to know when you are want to fetch data basically, okay? Because there are many protocols. All of the websites would not be using the same way to fetch data or make requests. Some of them might be using API, some of them might be serving files, right? So we have to cover all of those kinds of websites. So you get the point what you want to do. Okay, so I think this is all for today. If there are any issues or doubts for within today's session, please let me know. I think we have 5-10 more minutes, so we can take any questions related to these part. So please shoot, or otherwise we can. Uh, this session is concluded. Any doubts, anyone? Dave, Virendra sir, Srisha, Srikhar, any issues? Any doubts in today's session? Okay, great, great, Dave. I hope this was fairly clear because not a lot of things was discussed today. It was just an overview. Now, when we will get into the actual coding, obviously these things will come again, and there we will be able to make sense of what we have discussed today. Okay, so that is the only takeaway for today's session, just to understand these concepts. All right. If that is done, I think we can conclude today's session. So I'll just stop recording the session.